Hi, it's Louisa Dahl, and welcome to the Interactive Minds podcast, where I talk with passionate marketers, innovators, and digital leaders about their specific recipes for success. In today's show, I come to you from my home office because, of course, at the time of recording, we're all in coronavirus lockdown. But the show must go on, and today I interview Amanda King from Optus, talking about SEO, content, and a self-proclaimed failed content project that she worked on. Here's 3 things you're going to learn. 1, how a content project can be waylaid by approvals and what you can do to pivot. 2, the flywheel effect that you should leverage in content publishing. And 3, the recent changes to SEO and content that might change how you write. Let's get into it. Today I'm speaking with Amanda King, who is an SEO specialist at Optus. Amanda and I met at Online Marketing Sydney at an event earlier this year where we both spoke, back in the time of live events. So I'm really excited to have Amanda on the show today. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. At live events, you would never think they would be a luxury, but now it's like unheard of. So
I know, it's a bit of a line in the sand, isn't it? Back when we could have live events versus when everything is virtual. Well, you've been an SEO expert for over 10 years now. Tell us a little bit around how you landed in SEO.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, at least my age in the industry, it kind of happens by chance. I studied marketing, English lit, and business in school. And I went abroad and taught in China for a year and then came back to where I studied uni and wanted to do something locally and happened to fall into a copywriting role. And at the marketing agency, it was at a point where SEO was about how many times you could include the exact text that you were looking to rank for. So they figured they could teach me SEO, and it just kind of went from there.
Okay, excellent. And so you've obviously found your niche and decided to be an SEO specialist as you went through your career. Was there a time where you considered kind of expanding and being more of a generalist, or were you always kind of, do you think, destined to stay around that SEO space?
It's hard to say. I think SEO in and of itself kind of plays into a bit of a generalist role because I have to know about e-commerce and how that works. I need to know about behavioral psychology. I need to understand about user experience and front-end web development. So I'm definitely quite T-shaped in terms of what I understand. And for me, SEO really is about kind of solving the puzzle. So it's broad in that sense. So no, I've never really just thought about really changing roles necessarily.
Yeah, perfect. What has been a highlight of your career to date?
Working on the Apple launch last year was actually really intriguing because I'd never worked through a project that was that fast-paced.
Okay.
We literally had to get everything done in about 48 hours.
Was that for a new device coming out?
Yes, that was for the iPhone 11 this past year.
Okay.
And it was super fast paced, and everyone was pulling together to get it done and trying to figure things out. In terms of things that I've done personally as well, I headed up and created an analytics offering at one of my previous agencies, and that was a really interesting situation as well that kind of proved to myself that I could lead and start off new product offerings like that.
Tell us a little bit around your current role at Optus. What does that involve for you?
So I work on the handset squad. We're an agile model. And so what that means is I actually get a lot of work that needs to happen quite rapidly because it is such a high volume kind of offering for Optus. It's obviously one of the biggest revenue generators, so things need to happen quite quickly. So a lot of my time is around figuring out the most viable solution for whether that's content or URLs or changes that we need to make with the website, and making sure that those are implemented correctly by our producers or developers. So it's a lot of coordination.
Interesting, because I must say rapid and SEO aren't terms that I typically put together. So we might come back and delve into that in a moment, because that sounds like, you might have to take a slightly different approach to perhaps the traditional to get results in that space. What does your day-to-day look like?
So Optus at the moment is a company that has quite a few meetings, but again, a lot of that is because we have so many different departments that need to coordinate with each other, because we have product department, we have a marketing department, we have a sales department. So there's a lot of coordination, and I appreciate the meetings, especially when it's quite to the point and people actually get the answers that they need.
Yep.
And then, like I said, it's working with our developers and our producers to actually implement the things that we need to get done from an SEO perspective, or helping out with other things like A/B testing or various other kind of performance impacts.
Okay, so would you typically then be abreast of new phones that become available and new plan updates, and be responsible for making sure they can be found
Yes,
and reached by
absolutely.
customers? Okay, can you tell us about, talk us through maybe an example of one of those and how you bring in that rapid element to your SEO?
It's tough, because a lot of it is actually kind of laying down groundwork with the other teams. So kind of speaking to product or marketing ahead of time, and our IT systems as well, and being like, hey, say this thing needs to happen, but we have to get it done in 48 hours. So giving people that kind of headspace to be like, okay, this is something that usually may take a week to 2 weeks, but we need to get it done within a very reduced time frame, and this is why.
Yeah.
And for me, a lot of times it comes back to articulating that business impact, and saying, this is something that we need to change quite quickly, because it could lose us a third of our site traffic if we don't implement it, or something like that. But the actual kind of getting stuff done, oftentimes it's not necessarily on me, but for me, it's a lot of coordinating with other people and working with the producers and working with kind of the larger IT team to make sure that it's something that everyone is aware of.
Yeah. And what about with the search engines themselves? I mean, obviously, I presume Optus has quite a bit of credibility in that space. So are you finding that when you need to get things up quickly, that it's well represented in a fairly reasonable time frame?
Yeah, that is one area where Optus is super lucky as an enterprise kind of household brand in Australia. I mean, I've seen like code level changes to our pages get indexed in less than 12 hours.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And that would be something that is purely because of that credibility that you have, do you think?
Yeah, it's a big part of it. I mean, Google with their knowledge graph and entity recognition, Optus is a very strongly recognized entity and has a lot of very broad connections to kind of Australia as a whole, as well as a lot of pages. So it is something, a lot of it I do put down to the kind of already existing authority that Optus as a site has.
How do you think that would be for a company that didn't have that kind of level of authority?
Not rapid, like you said, rapid SEO is not something that happens. So yeah, absolutely. For a smaller company or for a smaller business, it would definitely be harder. And for us as well, like I'm sure we could actually get some of our pages and things indexed more quickly, but our framework is actually very strongly JavaScript. So it does actually take a bit more time than it would if it was straight HTML as well.
Yeah. And I imagine there's probably almost a bit of pre-work that you do behind the scenes as well, in terms of, knowing what's coming down the line and being able to prepare pages in advance and get stuff up in advance, even if you don't have all the details. Is that part of how you work?
Yeah, for sure. Working with the product owners of our squad to understand, what's coming in the next 2 weeks, and maybe creating something in advance to send through legal or whatever that may be. Yes, that is absolutely just a part of our normal process, operating as a squad as well. And I feed into that quite heavily.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. All right, now today we're going to talk about a content project that you've worked on in the past that hasn't gone as well as you would have liked it to. Can you tell us a little bit around the background for this?
Sure. So this was something that I kicked off back when I started at Optus, and it was something where I noticed a really big opportunity around the kind of discovery level content that we had on the site, and how I could grow that and build that. And it was something where, all the best intentions, the plan is something that would work in theory. And it got to a point where we weren't able to meet the goals or the targets that we wanted to, in part because of processes and review requirements that I didn't necessarily know about when I first came into the organization. So for me, it was a big learning curve in terms of understanding the process of how things got done at Optus and generally at kind of enterprise level companies in terms of the layers of approvals that things need to go through and who needs to be across what you're actually doing.
Yeah, and I imagine coming into a big company like that, there's a whole lot of levels of things that you might not have immediate visibility to. So take us through this project. When you started off, what were you aiming to do?
Yeah, so what we were aiming to do was increase our visibility by basically to what that discovery level content was when it was being actively managed by a full team, and looking to actually enhance that a bit by linking back to our sales pages and to our e-commerce pages. And that actually seems like where a lot of the consideration came in into why it didn't necessarily work, because there was requirements around legal and corporate affairs and things like liabilities as well, when we started linking back to our sales pages.
Really?
Which was interesting, yeah.
Because I can imagine that wouldn't be something, I mean, it sounds kind of easy when you say it in a sentence that you're really just, tweaking content or adding more content to your site. At what point did you realize that this was going to either get held up or not be able to go through as you'd hoped?
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest realization for me hit when I started the tender process in August and we kicked off the project in September. And I think it really started ticking over in my head when by mid-November we hadn't published any content yet.
Yep.
So it was very much a timeline thing for me where it made me realize, oh, hey, this is going to take a bit longer to actually get done than I thought.
What was your initial timeline? What were you hoping to, get up and when?
So the initial timeline for the entire project was September through end of March was the original timeline.
Yeah. And how much content are we talking here?
So the goal for content was something like 20 articles a month.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you were producing those articles and they were getting written, but they weren't getting published. Is that kind of what that stage was?
Yeah, effectively, because the content review had to go through our legal team. It had to go through our corporate affairs team. It had to go through a lot of layers and levels of approvals to make sure that we weren't kind of misrepresenting Optus. And that wasn't something that I had necessarily anticipated in terms of the times for those reviews.
And what were the implications of it being held up in this way?
A lot of our content, while it was evergreen, was also to a certain extent timely and based around the fact that the content would be actually visible in search results about 3 to 4 months after it was published.
Yes.
So the timeliness of some of the evergreen content was a bit out of whack, and also just generally the impact of the product and the production of the content. You get a certain flywheel effect with content when you're regularly publishing, and the fact that that was getting held up was holding up kind of the overall traction that we were trying to get with that discovery level content.
Okay. So what did you do when you realized that things were still, what was this, mid-November, you said things were still not kind of getting published yet?
Yeah, so that we had basically a mitigation or a conversation with our superiors and the people who had kind of sponsored the project, and kind of said, this is the situation, and this is what's happening. And in terms of what we could do, we went and had conversations with the various approvers and stakeholders and looked to see if there were any ways that we could make this easier for them or speed it up for them, and got some answers back on that. So implemented those, which did end up speeding up the approvals process, still affected the overall trajectory and like that flywheel effect that I mentioned as well. So it was a half step forward, but still not quite addressing the full impact of what we were seeing from a timeline perspective.
Did you have to compromise on the content itself as well in terms of what you were trying to achieve there?
Yeah, to a certain extent. Let go a bit on the topic focus and the kind of individual metrics of success for individual articles, and just looked at the broader improvement of the overall content hub, and repositioned that goal and target.
Yeah. So you had to modify your goals kind of midway through, I suppose, to allow for these unforeseen delays, and then potentially, I guess, compromise on what your outcomes are going to be as a result of some of the things you couldn't do, perhaps, that you didn't expect.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk to us about the flywheel effect a little bit more broadly speaking. Can you tell us, like, what would you aim to do in order to get that momentum?
Look, it depends on kind of the niche and the content that you already have. But generally, I have found historically that when you regularly create content that's relevant to your customers, or even update old content, like you mentioned as well, that is an indicator to Google of freshness. And QDF, so Query Deserves Freshness, is something that Google has had in their algorithm for a long time, and it is being integrated into their kind of wider rank brain algorithms and things like that. So it depends on the niche and the competitors, but generally just being able to regularly publish content that's relevant often will help with your visibility.
Okay, so yeah, it makes sense then that if you had a lesser flow of content than you were intending, it would impact the overall project. What were the end results like for you, and what ended up happening? Did you get all the content up eventually?
We ended up getting a decent amount of content up, but we actually pivoted our expectations again in January and decided to focus on writing less content, but having very specific learnings that we wanted to get from it. So effectively treating each piece of content like an experiment. And that became a bit more viable as a result for us. So rather than saying we want to publish 20 articles in a month to get traffic, we said, okay, we want to publish 5 articles this month and focus them on ranking for individual targeted keywords that we're setting for each article, or something along those lines. And so we really kind of laser focused in January. So we actually pivoted this project twice.
Okay, yeah, right. And so now the project is complete, I assume?
Yes,
it's
the
all
project
done?
is complete, yeah.
And what would you say in hindsight that your overall learnings were, and what would you do differently next time?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was a very ambitious project, and I think that for me, the biggest learning was in an enterprise environment, how to be a bit more conservative. So like it would be something where maybe instead of proposing to execute that whole plan in that, what was it, 7 or 8 month time frame, that I would actually do a bit more of a proof of concept and say, this is something that we want to do for a particular section of the website about X, Y, and Z content and publish it in this way. So it is one of those strange things where you want the flash and you want the bigger ideas, but sometimes they actually need to be a bit more realistic and a bit more conservative around what's actually achievable within the time and within the existing kind of structure that you've got.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think an element of that was your understanding of the organisation and how long you'd been there to understand those processes? Or is it something that you were kind of going to come up against regardless?
I think it was both, I think. Long story short, it was a bit of me not necessarily being fully aware of how much that approvals process kind of mattered and how much impact it actually had on timelines. But regardless of how long you've been at an enterprise level company, that is something that is always going to be a consideration. And it is something that is always going to be kind of evolving and changing as rules and regulations change as well.
Yeah. So you refer to this now as your failed content project. How does this impact, I suppose, your future vision? I mean, you've told us some of the learning, so I understand that would be part of it. Has there been any other change, I suppose, to how you're working now?
I think it is just generally kind of pulling that learning, because failures are learnings, pulling that learning into the way that I function every day. And like we were saying earlier as well, just planning a bit more ahead than I think I need to plan. So having not just an idea of what's happening in the next fortnight, but probably what's happening in the next month or so as well.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent. Now, thank you for sharing about that. That's really interesting. And I love that we can talk about, a failed content project. And you can't see my little fingers doing inverted commas when we say that, because I totally agree. It is all about learning and evolving. And it sounds like you did a great job of pivoting along the way to work within the environment that you found yourself. But I think it's important we talk about these and talk about the learnings as well, because that is how we grow and learn from each other and why we're here at the end of the day. To broaden the topic a little bit here around your SEO and content knowledge, what would you say has been the main things that you've noticed or that have changed in the last few years around content?
I think that the biggest change that I've seen has been around entities and entity recognition, and how Google is essentially pulling together their own Wikipedia in the background. And how that's actually changed for a website owner, and what that actually means is oftentimes it's less about the length of the content that you write, or even the depth of the content that you write, and actually just making sure that the content that you have on that page or in that section actually answers your customer's question. And I think that that's probably the big thing, is that Google has been kind of winding their way towards this for a long time. But now I'm actually seeing it come to fruition, where it's not necessarily about the length of the content that you write. It's about, is this actually genuinely answering the person's question?
And I can imagine when you've got content about products, for example, that's something that you can check it off fairly easily or check against. What about when you're writing for blogs or, thought leadership?
Well, there are a lot of tools out there like Answer the Public and even Google Trends that allow you to actually see. So say, for example, the content marketing field or the SEO field allows you to see the kind of common questions that people are asking. And a lot of times I will just kind of take those concepts verbatim and find ways to explicitly answer them in what I'm writing. And oftentimes that includes using headers and bulleted lists, or actually like delineating those answers in the copy. So it's, and even your own kind of internal search as well, in terms of if customers aren't finding a particular question or answer.
Yeah, right. Now, as we know, we're working through quite a unique time at the moment. Everyone's working from home. We're all a little bit disrupted in what we're doing. How has this impacted your role in this space?
Honestly, not too much, because SEO is one of those very lucky things that you can pretty much do anywhere. So as long as I have a computer, I'm fine. And as an organization, I think Optus is pretty good about using things like Zoom or using things like Microsoft Teams and even emails and chat to make sure that everyone is across what they need to be across.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of your day-to-day work, you're still kind of working to the plans that you had previously?
I mean, those have definitely been impacted because we have been looking to see how we can support with the current pandemic crisis, what the craziness that's going on. So we have quickly changed focus to that. But in terms of handset releases and overarching strategy, not too much has changed, I can honestly say.
Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing all that detail with us. One of the questions I like to ask is to understand how you would work and organise your time, your email, your calendar and tasks. Are there any particular things that you do in this space that work particularly well for you?
I am a massive fan of lists. For a long time, I used a couple of apps to do that, but I always keep coming back to paper. So I usually just basically write a bullet journal of my work. And usually I'll have a big list that I'll start for the week and then daily lists that I do every day. So yeah, I am a list person, and that is me.
Yes, I can relate. I actually did a very similar system up until recently as well. So I can see the benefit of being able to tick things off for sure. How do you keep yourself current in terms of what's happening? Obviously, you're working in a very fast-changing area with SEO. What are your resources or go-to places that you look at?
I actually have a whole kind of RSS feed. I use Feedly, and I pull in articles from all of the kind of industry publications, as well as a few individuals that I think are particularly smart when it comes to some of the more obscure things, like people like Bill Slosky, who sits down and analyzes like individual Google patents for what that could mean. So yeah, it's generally industry publications and some individual thought leaders that I keep in touch with. And then things like this as well, where it's just having conversations with people who know what they're about.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's so important to do that, isn't it? And I'm obviously a big fan. It's one of my favorite parts of my job is being able to talk to people and see what's working and what's not. So thank you so much for being here today. If someone wants to get in touch with you and reach out, what's the best way for them to find you?
Look, I'm not great on Twitter, but I do have an account. Honestly, I would say just reach out to my email. It's amanda.king, King, @optus.com.au.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. We'll be sure to put it in the show notes as well. Thanks again for being part of the show today.
No worries. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please subscribe. And we desperately need some reviews, so if you like the show, please go ahead and leave a few words to tell others. I'll be super grateful. My recommended action item from today's show is to review your content plan with the flywheel effect in mind. You can access today's show notes and links at interactiveminds.com/podcast. See you next week.